So hello everyone. I'm Zach Schloman. Many of you know me, but it's great to see you again and hear from you. I'm class of '87 from ILR, 1990 from the law school, and currently I direct the entrepreneurship program at Cornell that we like to call E at C. Thanks for joining us today for our latest webinar in our series. And today I'm delighted to welcome Zoltan Vardy from across the Atlantic. He's currently in Budapest in Hungary. So before we get started, a couple of quick housekeeping items. First of all, our program is brought to you today by EATC, the Cornell Entrepreneur Network, Cornell Silicon Valley, and the International Alumni Relations Group. You can learn all about these programs in links that will be populating in the chat. You can check those out. The format today will be a three-part webinar with Zoltan delivering the content. After each part, we will have some Q&A from you. I'm going to ask that you please put your questions into the chat. Make sure to select all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your messages. Sometimes that cuts down on duplicates. And then I'll take select questions from the chat to ask Zoltan live after each section of the webinar. We are recording today's program. You can view it later on the CEN livestream channel and also the EATC YouTube channel, along with all of our previous episodes. In fact, we've had quite a few because we started this at the very beginning of COVID, and we decided to keep it going even as COVID has waned. We are going through all the way. And by the way, in case you don't know, everything at Cornell is basically back to normal, fully live, back to like it used to be, which is great. So let's get started. Again, I'm delighted to welcome Zoltan Vardy, who is a startup mentor and founder of the Launch Code. Zoltan will share his expertise around breaking into Europe and tips on building a strong and successful international expansion strategy. So Zoltan, take it from here. I'm going to go off video while you're delivering each segment, and I'll jump back in for the Q&A. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much, Zach. I appreciate it. Let me just get my presentation up and running.
I can see it fine.
Just need to do this, so you should see the full.
There you go.
All right, and let me just put this where I can see somebody there. All right, fantastic. So, hello everybody, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. It is, as Zach said, I'm dialing in from Budapest for what I hope will be a very useful and educational webinar for those of you who are interested in talking about how U.S. startups can break into the European market, potentially as a start of a broader international expansion strategy. So look, we can all agree that the world has become a much smaller place over the past decade, particularly these past few years. I mean, from a financial and consumer perspective, the connections between continents are greater than ever before. Technology, like what we're experiencing right now, has made kind of interactions between people sitting in very different time zones completely obvious and natural. And I think we've learned the hard way that what starts off as a problem in one isolated part of the world, whether it's a pandemic or a supply chain issue or a shortfall in energy or even a regional war, it's going to have far-reaching consequences for everyone, whether you're sitting in San Francisco or New York or London or Sao Paulo or Tokyo for that matter. If there's a silver lining here, it's that thanks to kind of these interconnections, the concept of building a truly global business, even as an early stage startup, doesn't seem quite so far-fetched as it did, say, even 10 years ago. And the benefits of building an international business is quite compelling. I mean, a global presence gives you access to a much larger base of consumers that obviously impacts your revenue growth. You build instant credibility with customers, with users, with investors. You tap into a really diverse pool of talent that is actually affordable in many cases, all of which combine to boost ultimately the exit value of your business. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, okay, I get this potential upside, but like, how do I even get started on this path to international expansion? What do I need to know or to do to kind of boost my chance of success? And is there some sort of blueprint that other companies have followed that has worked and that I can follow as well? Well, I'm here to tell you that there are a lot of factors that impact how you answer these questions. the competitive landscape of your niche, the level of product market fit that you might have in your business, your founding team, all of those are going to combine to have an impact on how successful you are. What you shouldn't do for sure is fall into the trap of sort of thinking that you can copy and paste what you're doing in the US as the basis for entering international markets, or getting started without sort of a clear strategy of what you want to achieve and how you will get there. Because a lot of time, my experience is what happens is that, you know, an ambitious founder books a few deals in London or starts working with a developer in Berlin, but they don't really take the time to understand how these individual steps fit into a bigger picture for their business. And so, you know, these sort of opportunistic approach eventually stalls because you lack focus and it yields lack of traction. I think there's a better way to go about this, a more effective way. And I want to bring this approach to life today by focusing on a part of the world that I think best fits as a first step towards international expansion, specifically Europe. Europe is a natural choice because it's a very mature business area. It's got a market of 750 million consumers. Obviously, there's historical connections to the UK in particular in terms of language and culture and legal characteristics. And a lot of business-to-business SaaS companies, software as a service companies, which is actually the largest segment of US startups, have successfully entered the European market and made a meaningful portion of their business come out of the region. So companies like Dropbox, Slack, HubSpot, companies I'm sure many of us have heard of, they all grew into global players thanks to their European presence. And currently, these companies generate between 25 and 35% of their global revenues from Europe. Now, to achieve this level of success, you can't just copy and paste, and you can't be ad hoc in the way you do it. You have to prepare for the process by, first of all, understanding the market structure you're entering, by focusing your market entry strategy, and by building a strategic and a systematic approach to generating sales and marketing. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today in these three parts. I'm going to share kind of some principles and some insights by giving you kind of a lay of the land, right? So you get a sense of the business and the cultural environment you're stepping into in Europe. Next, I want to talk to you about the importance of focus in your market entry strategy in terms of both your geography, your value proposition, and even your own personal involvement. And then finally, what I thought I'd do is explain how to kind of build a three-pronged business development approach, a model that's going to maximize your presence and finish off with some really specific tips on how to keep you focused as you execute. So as Zach mentioned, I'll be stopping after each of these sections to take questions. So please share those questions in the chat and Zach will manage that process. Two disclaimers to start. This is not a legal or tax workshop. I'm not an expert in either area. This is more about a go-to-market strategy on international market. And this approach that I'll be talking about today probably best applies to business companies, not necessarily business to consumer, though obviously some of the elements are clearly going to overlap. And so really my hope is that you'll get some really actionable insights today that you can apply immediately to your respective businesses. So a very brief introduction about me, just so you kind of have a sense of the context of the stuff I'll be sharing. I'm a startup mentor professionally. That's what I do as a job. I help business-to-business startup founders kind of build a predictable recurring revenue stream globally by applying a business development system I created called the Launch Code. And it's a framework I share through personal mentoring programs, through group workshops, through on-demand online course that I've developed. And I've kind of been in the global space for a while. I've actually closed about $2 billion worth of business in business-to-business sales over the course of my 30-year career. I like to say I'm 50% corporate, 50% entrepreneur. In my last kind of corporate career, I was Senior Vice President of Global Ad Sales for NBC Universal International, based in London. It managed a $650 million a year business across 30 countries. I also was CEO of one of the largest TV broadcasting groups in Central and Eastern Europe. But I also have a pretty strong entrepreneurial background. I've launched and built about a dozen businesses in media and technology and professional services. And I've actually had a successful exit as a founder, as well as an angel investor. For those of you who are wondering why this European guy is talking with an American accent, I actually was born and raised in the United States. I'm a very proud member of the Cornell class of 1992, but I've lived most of my adult life internationally in 5 different European countries. And as Zach mentioned, I'm currently in Budapest, but I split my time between Budapest and London. So enough about me. Let's talk about the lay of the land and kind of get an understanding of what you can expect in Europe. So in the early 1990s, the cable TV channel Cartoon Network began its expansion strategy into Europe by establishing a regional headquarters in London. And it had actually broadcast a single English language channel across the continent, distributing classic cartoons that many of us grew up with: Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, all this fun stuff in my generation. And the channel quickly gained popularity in the UK and Ireland with both kids and with advertisers. And sort of it became very clear early on that a single English language feed covering the entire continent would not be viable in the long term. Kids just wanted to watch cartoons in their own language. Advertisers wanted to reach kids in specific marketplaces. So Turner Broadcasting, which is the parent company of Cartoon Network, took the decision to start localizing the channel across Europe. I actually joined the company as a business development manager in the London office in the mid-90s, and I led the localization effort of Cartoon Network in Central and Eastern Europe in countries like Russia, Poland, and Hungary. So I got really firsthand experience in what it means to expand a US-based business across Europe. And I quickly learned a very important lesson, which is that you really have to adjust your strategy to meet local market demands. In different markets, different characters were popular. They had different historical backgrounds. The Flintstones was huge in Hungary in the 1960s, so it had a big impact in the 1990s. Scooby-Doo, one of my favorites, was virtually unknown outside the UK. And in some countries, these characters really didn't have any history, so it was really starting from scratch. And so these experiences drove me to the conclusion that to be successful in expanding an American business into international markets in Europe, you really have to sometimes adjust your product and certainly adjust your marketing to suit local needs. So let me tell you a bit more about Europe and give you an insight into the region from kind of a startup perspective. So this is a continent of 750 million people. So it's about 2.5 times the size of the United States in population, spread out over 44 countries. About half of these countries are actually members of the EU. And that accounts for about half of the population. The EU, as many of you I'm sure will know, it's an economic and political union of countries led by Germany and France that ensures free trade between member countries. Geographically speaking, there's many ways of dividing Europe, but there's kind of Northern Europe in the purple, which is basically Scandinavia, UK, Ireland. You've got Western Europe with countries like Germany, France, Netherlands, Switzerland. Southern Europe in green, so Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and neighboring countries. And then you've got Eastern Europe all the way from Poland, Hungary into Russia and parts of the former Soviet Union. Now, stereotypes are always a bit flawed, but we know that they're based on some kernel of truth. And so when you look at the differences between these various countries and regions, you can actually discover some really interesting insights. You know, if you think about in terms of consumption habits, what's the difference? Well, if you could look at Europe from that perspective, there are countries where you will drink a great glass of wine, like in Italy and France. There are countries where you will drink a good glass of beer, like in the UK and Ireland. And there are countries where you have a shot of vodka, whether it's Finland or Sweden or Russia. This is different, obviously, historical perspective on consumption. Behavior-wise, also very big differences. I found this great graphic about the volume of people in different parts of the region. If you go up north into Finland, you'll have a hard time having a long conversation from somebody from Finland. They don't like to talk very much. It's no coincidence that Nokia, the original mobile phone company, was built in Finland because it was a great way for people to connect without actually having to speak to each other in person. You go farther south, you know, I've had business lunches in Rome and Italy that started at noon and ended at 4, and we didn't even get to business. So it's a very different cultural environment of behavior. Lifestyles wise, you know, there's this great question: do you live to work or work to live? Well, people in the South, they work to live, and people in the North, they live to work. So it's a very different style. If you look at it from a startup perspective, Europe is a country or a region, I'm sorry, that has actually generated about 120 companies that have, with valuations of $1 billion or more. Okay, that's what a unicorn is in this context. About 55% of these have actually come about in the last year and a half. So it's really indicating the incredible growth of business and valuations. Some of the companies that have come out of the region that you may have heard of: Spotify from Sweden, Grammarly from the Ukraine, Zendesk from Denmark, UiPath, a very recent success story, a $30 billion company that came out of Romania, listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange in the business-to-business space. So lots of really amazing companies that are coming out of the region. The startup ecosystems there, you can really break down into 5 key areas. London is certainly the most popular, takes up about 50% of the total funding that's allotted to startups in Europe. Berlin, a very popular destination, especially since Brexit, a very solid ecosystem, a lot of companies coming out of there. Amsterdam, known for the ease of business, especially focus on health, biotech, and clean tech. Paris, very highly visible ecosystem, a lot of support, some specialty understanding of IoT, Internet of Things, and gaming. And then finally, Stockholm, which is an up-and-coming region or city with very high investments levels and a lot of fintech companies. So these are like the traditional top 5, and you'll find that a majority of startup activity comes from these different cities. Where you see interesting exception to this, or is what I would call Europe's hidden gem. And this is a country that has a population of 1.3 million people. So that's about the equivalent of greater metro area of Memphis, Tennessee, just as a point of reference. It actually has attracted the 3rd most funding per capita in the entire world after Singapore and Israel, and actually ahead of the United States. And this country has generated 10 unicorns, so 10 companies worth $1 billion or more. Some of them you may have heard of, Skype, certainly I would imagine, TransferWise or Wise, Pipedrive, Bolt are just a couple of the most well-known. Again, I can't see the chat, but I wonder if anybody could guess which country this is I'm talking about. I don't know, Zach, if you can read the chat, if there's somebody there that can tell me what some guesses are.
Estonia, Sweden.
All right, that
Estonia,
was a quick.
Estonia.
Okay, so probably not as hidden gem as I thought it would be. That is in fact Estonia. Right at the tip of Europe, former Republic of the Soviet Union, and a huge success story as it relates to building startup success. And why that is something I'm happy to talk about if that's something of interest to you. So to sum up, there are some challenges associated with building a business in Europe, a startup, expanding it there. Certainly you have to adapt your marketing approach. Obviously, you need to use local language, given the level of culture diversity that I've described. The good news is that if you've built your business across multiple regions in the US, you've probably already had to tackle a similar level of cultural diversity. Think for a moment, if I just say the words New Yorker and Texan, well, that will conjure up images, I'm sure, in your mind. That's about the same difference as a Swede and an Italian, right? So there's very, very different context to some of these associations. You certainly do have to localize your product to suit individual markets. So other than the language interface, there's different layers of technology. I think about processing payments in local currencies is something you have to do. And there's also a set of diverse legal and tax structures that you have to deal with, certainly in employment, technology certifications, although there's a high level of consistency within the EU countries. So that does give you some benefit. So why grow into Europe? Very clearly, despite all the challenges, it's an amazing revenue opportunity. You're accessing 750 million potential customers. The B2B software market in Europe is worth over $100 billion a year. If you're successful, you can make up about 30% of your total revenues from Europe. You have access to engineering talent at an affordable price. Just as a point of reference, the average cost of a developer in the United States is $110,000 a year. In the Silicon Valley area, it's about $170,000. The average cost of a developer in Western Europe is $55,000, and the average cost of a developer in Eastern Europe is $25,000. And these are, as I'm told, very, very well trained and highly successful developers. And the final thing is, look, it's an obvious stepping stone to building a global presence, starting in this familiar territory. You can make your mistakes and move on from there. So for all these reasons, I think Europe is a very interesting place to build your international presence. So at this point, I'd love to stop for questions and see if there's anything I can answer.
That's actually really interesting. So we did have 2 questions, or one comment and 1 question. I'm going to start with a question first, and then go back to the comment. So it says, what do you think of Station F which is an
Yeah.
incubator in Paris, started by mobile phone entrepreneur Xavier Neal, or for that matter, local in-country incubators that seem to help with logistics, legal marketing for foreign startups.
Yeah. So actually, I think that's a really interesting way to do a soft landing. Station F is in Paris. There's a couple of other ones. Founders Factory in London, High Tech XL in Amsterdam, Sting in Stockholm. These are all kind of like single market focused accelerators. There's also actually accelerators that are the offshoots of US accelerators. So TechStars has got programs in London, Amsterdam, Berlin, Dublin, and so on. These are great ways to build your network, to get your foot in the door. You can start meeting mentors, meeting potential investors there, and I think it's a great way to have a soft landing if you want to get started. Obviously, you have to be at an early stage enough where it makes sense for you to go to an accelerator and they're happy to accept you. If you're too far advanced, then it's not necessarily a great fit.
Yep. And do those incubators typically work on the same system that the U.S. incubators work, where they're taking a small equity piece and giving you a
It
small
varies.
amount of
There are
cash?
non-equity accelerators. There are equity accelerators. There's kind of this Y Combinator model where you get, I think, $100,000 for 8% or something like that. That's sort of a standard that's been accepted. But I think that you have to choose an accelerator that ideally has a niche that is a relevant niche for you.
Mm-hmm.
But also that obviously, if they're taking equity, they offer that value that makes sense for you.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about Estonia's programs, including their e-residency program? There's a bunch of folks that are interested in Estonia.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So that gets to the question of why is Estonia the home of 10 unicorns? It's a very concerted strategy on the government's part to build a digital first society. In Estonia, 99% of the things that you manage in with the government in official institutions is online. So literally, you can live your life online. It's very efficient.
Hmm.
It's got an e-residency program. It launched about 10 years ago, where you can basically get a startup residency is called. And I'm not sure of the details of it, but effectively you can become a resident of Estonia without necessarily being there physically. And the result of that is that 25% of startup founders in Estonia are actually foreign citizens. So they've attracted a lot of talent internationally to the marketplace. And that combined with the fact that it's very low income tax, very tax-friendly regime, the flywheel effect of having 10 unicorns and all of the talent and the money it's brought has created this incredible ecosystem. And I think that if anybody's interested in tapping into that, Estonia is a great place to do it.
Okay. Do you have any insights on ed tech sectors in Europe?
Well, fintech is certainly one that seems to be taking off. So if you look at kind of the top startups that have come out of Europe that aren't necessarily in the US but have grown across Europe, Revolut is a huge fintech story. Klarna out of Sweden, also Mali out of Amsterdam. These are all kind of payment, digital banking type of a solution. So that's one of the areas that I think is very, very popular. Another is, and I have a slide on this later, is interesting, the food delivery service. So there's so many of these really successful food delivery services apps effectively that have been come out, and that also seems to be an area where there's been a tremendous amount of growth, and a lot of American companies are playing catch up to European companies
Yeah.
in that space.
And how about ed tech? Anything going on
Ed tech,
there?
ed
Yeah.
tech is not an area I'm particularly notice or familiar with. I do know that there's a very well-known accelerated program out of the UK called Supercharger Ventures that focuses on ed tech, and I know that is an area that there is some development in through that accelerator.
Cool. One person did ask about how to apply your program to consumer goods, but I think you sort of said it was more tailored to B&B.
Yeah, I mean the essence of it. I haven't even, I mean, as I get into the next section, I can talk about that in more
Okay.
detail. But it would some of the things I'll be talking about are more about how do you do business to business with customers rather than consumer
Okay.
related stuff.
And maybe one more quick one. It said, any tips on how to tap local EU-based VCs? And are there any
Hmm.
major differences between US-based VCs and
Yeah. So,
US-based VCs and
so
European-based VCs?
so so it's interesting. In the last 5 years, there's been a huge uptick in European VC activity. It used to be that European VCs were kind of like the bastard child of American VCs, but that's no longer the case. You see Index Ventures out of the UK, Balderton Capital, you see DN Capital. Some of these are very, really successful VCs out of the European market that have delivered, really big wins. So, unicorn style wins. And I think that that knowledge, that experience is grown in the last 5 years. And success breeds success. Once you start having a couple of big exits, then more money flows in there. So how do you tap into that? The same way you tap into US VCs, which is you have a compelling problem that you provide a compelling solution to, and you build a team around it that is credible, that you can actually bring this concept to life. So it's not much different than what you do in Silicon Valley. The only thing is, rather than traveling down Sand Hill Road, knocking on a lot of doors, you jump on a plane and you go from London to Stockholm to Paris.
Okay. I said I was going to take one more, but I'm going to make it two more just because it's
Okay.
well, and there's more in the chat that we're not going to be able to get to.
Yeah.
But how has Brexit affected the UK as a launching point?
Well, look, fintech's a different industry area, right? Because that was one of the areas that London, has been the global leader in, or financial services. So that has been hit. A lot of companies are moving to Germany. A lot of businesses are moving to Amsterdam because they simply otherwise couldn't do business easily with the EU. I don't think it's helped, but I also don't think it's killed it. It just has made it more difficult for UK-based companies to do business with European companies, like in every industry, right? So it's not necessarily in the tech space. And I see in the chat there's a question: has it shifted things to Dublin? Yes, Ireland is definitely benefiting from Brexit in that sense, because Dublin in general has been a very central. Google, Facebook, Dropbox, their European headquarters are based in Dublin. So already that's attracted a lot of
Right.
of
And
money.
that was a lot of that was for tax reasons.
For tax reasons, yeah.
They were already there.
Exactly.
Okay, so there are other questions, but I think we should jump into the next.
Yeah, let's move on to the next section. I'm sure there'll be some other things. Okay, great. So
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and share again, and then get back to. All right. Okay, so let's move on to part 2, which is about finding your focus. So you can't enter the European market trying to be everything to everybody. And I mean that both in a physical term, presence perspective, as well as a business strategy. The size of the market, the high level of competition, the variety of consumer behaviors from country to country, all of these require you to find your focus before you actually begin. And that means you need to decide what you will sell to who and how, where you want to base your operations and target customers, and how you personally will tackle the mental and the physical challenges of an international expansion. So let me talk about each of those individually. Many founders say to themselves, look, I know my product, I know my customer, I know what I'm doing. I sold in the US. I think it's a mistake. All right. You can't copy and paste your approach and hope it's going to work. You have to start by conducting some market research. You need to know exactly who you want to address with your product, where your product offers value. Look at the market characteristics, whether it's the size of the market, the legal landscape, the access to talent. Evaluate your competition, right? Who are your customers? Who are their customers? What's their pricing strategy? How much money have they raised? These are all really relevant points that you have to be aware of. And one of the most interesting thing is, we obviously think in global terms, but there are a lot of really successful local heroes in Europe that you have to contend with. And I mentioned the food delivery services business before. I just want to use this as an example. If you think of the US, there's basically 3 big players, right? Uber Eats, Grubhub, and DoorDash. That probably covers an overwhelming majority of the US. Well, if you do the same analysis in Europe, literally there are dozens and dozens and dozens of companies with roots in individual markets that are the preferred choice there. So Delivery Hero in Germany, Delivery Club in Russia, Deliveroo in the UK, Wolt in Finland, Glovo is based in Spain, Just Eat is a Dutch-Danish combination. These companies have expanded, and in some cases they've actually been the source of expansion for US companies. So DoorDash actually bought Volt, a WLT recently, so that's their entry into the European market. So you have to be aware of these kind of local heroes when you're doing your market research as well. Having done your research, look for gaps to fill, okay? There's always going to be some underserved niche, some geographic blind spot. Maybe it's a pricing position, whether you're pricing yourself as a premium option or the cheapest option, whatever it is, look for that gap and think of ways to fill it. You need to revisit your value proposition. You know, can you explain in one simple sentence, you know, what problem you solve, who benefits, and why you're better than the competition? These are things that you should have a clear understanding of. Do you need to adjust your product offering? Say, you know, package your product so it's easy for customers to say yes. These are all very important steps you need to take as you try to evaluate your strategy. Fine tune your client messaging, right? The messaging that you have in place could be slightly different from market to market. And some example that just jumped in mind from my marketing course at Cornell 30 years ago is Procter & Gamble. When they launched Pampers in Europe, I think they positioned it as, you know, keeps your baby dry in Belgium, and it positioned it as a cheap alternative in France, because, you know, same product, it was just a different positioning. So your messaging has to be very clear. And you also may need to adjust your product, okay? That means that there might be some features that you need to have in place that are not relevant in the US, that are relevant in Europe. These are all adjustments that you should give some thought to. The second piece that you need to focus is your physical presence. And, you know, when you're determining where you're going to focus your physical presence, you know, there's some best practices you should keep in mind. Generally speaking, kind of the concept of remote selling, which obviously in the post-COVID world has become far more acceptable, is realistic if your goal is to generate about 10% of your total revenues remotely from the US in the European market. All right. And this is where you're speaking to English-speaking and early adopters who buy many ways just like Americans do. But if you want to grow to 25 to 30% of your total revenues in Europe, you have to win over more traditional buyers who may not speak English. They might want to pay in euros or local currency. You're going to expect a certain level of sales and customer service in their time zone, in their language. So these are all things that you should keep in mind. Certainly one thing you should avoid is scattering employees across locations. The reason that is, if you're employing people in different jurisdictions, it gets you into a lot of employment issues, corporate tax issues that a lot of small companies really want to avoid. As you grow and you become bigger, you can build an infrastructure to manage this, but it's not a great thing to start off with. One common strategy that you can use is called the hub and spoke model, where you basically build a hub office in a single European location where you have the right talent, the right industry focus, and then you serve customers from that hub as you expand into other European locations. And you do that as you grow your business. So that sort of model is something that's quite popular. And I came across a piece of research conducted by a venture capital firm called Frontline. And they actually did a survey of 175 US B2B software companies that had entered the European market. And what they found is that the most popular landing spots for these companies are hands down London, Dublin, and Amsterdam. So 75% of US business-to-business SaaS companies set up shop in one of these three cities. As you can see, UK is the overwhelming choice, followed by Ireland, Netherlands, France, and Germany also are options. Why? Language and cultural similarities. And it's interesting, you know, you think of English, well, obviously in the UK and Ireland, that's natural. In the Netherlands, 90% of adults are fluent in English, 90. In Sweden, 80% of adults are fluent in English. Compare that to, let's say, 55% in Germany and 40% in France. So again, some of these markets are markets where you can actually work in English. Ecosystem maturity is also very important. So Berlin and Paris are conventionally, you know, following London in terms of ecosystem maturity. And that means VC financing availability, the number of startups, the number of accelerator programs, the community events, all those things that kind of add the soft glue that holds these different companies together. And of course, Zach, you mentioned tax-friendly environments. Ireland attracted a lot of early companies in the space for tax reasons. The Netherlands, the same. These still exist, but they're not necessarily the only reason to get into these markets. There's a distinction between where you land and where you ultimately build your workforce. And the same survey showed that the picture's slightly different when you look at the distribution of hiring across Europe. And while the UK is still the clear leader, Ireland comes in a very strong second. Netherlands, France, and Germany are a little bit more evenly distributed. And the key driver here is the access to talent, right? Talent availability varies across cities depending on the function, but generally speaking, the general rule is if you want a purely technical team that is separate from their sales counterparts, they can sit in more distant countries, Eastern Europe, Berlin, Stockholm, Paris, even Lisbon. But if you want to co-locate your engineering and your sales teams together, which is often a preferred option, London is absolutely the #1 option, followed by Dublin. Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Dropbox, all of those have sizable local operations. They're attracting talent, not just engineering talent, but sales talent as well. Amsterdam as well, it's the headquarters for Uber, for Netflix. These places attract talent and give development opportunities for people, and so they're a great place to land because you tap into that source of people. If you can't come to some very strategic decision, often the best thing to do is just to start somewhere and expand. Your landing spot may depend basically on some key client deal or partnership you close, or your first local hire, or even your personal and professional network. I mean, once you settle on a place, you can kind of get involved in that ecosystem, attend trade shows, conferences, business events, you learn more, you make more contacts, and then you kind of pick the market with the best opportunities for your company. So I've talked about the importance of focusing your proposition. I've talked about the importance of focusing your geographic presence. You also actually have to focus on something that I think is underestimated as it relates to international expansion, and that's focusing your mind, right? Building a global business really requires you to prepare for what is a really intense experience. And while I wouldn't consider this guy a startup founder per se, he embodies the spirit. Cornell alum, guy named Joe DeSena. He's the founder of a company called Spartan. Spartan, for those of you who don't know, is kind of the world's leading endurance sports brand. They've got about 10 million athletes around the world. They organize 300 obstacle courses in 40 countries each year. I'm a big Spartan fan as well. I do these races myself. I had the pleasure of interviewing Joe on my podcast. It's called Launch Stories, where I talk to entrepreneurs who build successful global businesses. And in our conversation, Joe talked about how in 2010, when he launched the business, he realized that he had to get into the global markets quickly, because if he didn't get there first, it might be really difficult for him to convert the competitors' customers to his brand. And so he had a friend in Slovakia, of all places. He tested the concept. It worked really well. Spartan spread across Eastern Europe, and from there, it spread to the rest of the world. And talk about commitment. Joe actually moved himself and his family to 6 different countries to oversee the company's international expansion. And my conclusion from this is, listen, if you decide to be prepared to do this, you got to focus your mind. You got to manage the stress. Lots of early morning conference calls, lots of frequent long haul flights, heavy investment of time and money, physically moving if necessary. So it's something that you have to be prepared for if you're going to get into this space. So with that, I want to conclude the second part, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Trying to find my control buttons. Let's go back to some of the questions that came up before while we're waiting for new ones to pop in. So there was one that said, how large is the market to service NGOs in Europe? It is substantial in the US, obviously.
Right. So I confess, NGOs are not one of my areas of expertise. So I really couldn't comment on that.
You could completely guess and pull it off.
But I wouldn't want to do that because that would be disingenuous. So I'd rather say I don't know.
Yeah. And do you see many Latin American startups expanding into the EU?
So I don't personally have a lot of experience with that, but I can tell you that there is, obviously, in the same way that there's a natural connection between the United States and the UK, there is a natural connection between Spain and Portugal and Latin America for obvious reasons because of the language. So I know that there's a lot of Spanish startups that in terms of their international expansion, go to the Latin American market first and build from there. So I would imagine that probably works in the inverse as well, where you'd expect the Latin American startups to have an option to go to Spain. But obviously that's just one market. So from there you can go into other areas as well.
Yeah, and this is a question for me, and I hope this doesn't come across as being politically incorrect, but I'm assuming that the monarchy transition in the UK is irrelevant to startup businesses and launching in the EU.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to be obviously respectful of the situation that a lot of people found the death of the Queen to be a tragic development, and obviously it is in its own right. But I have to say, I would find it hard to imagine something that's more different in spirit than a hereditary monarchy and building a startup from scratch, right? So it's just a completely different mentality and life and everything. So in that sense, I don't think there's any real impact on that.
Okay.
If unless there's some personal connection or something.
Yeah. Um, Deborah asks, are there still substantial opportunities in the media space, especially for content creators seeking global distribution, given
Yeah, so the media is something
streaming?
I worked in for 20 years, so I can speak to that in that context. Yeah, of course. I mean, content is always is always in demand. Distribution channels are exploding, and there it becomes a matter of how unique your content is, and whether you can build a brand around it so that people can distinguish it from the millions of hours of alternatives. And so it's a brand play. If you can have a very clear target audience with a piece of content and they find that to be valuable, then yeah, of course, you can use that as a way to expand international markets.
Yep. And then someone just asked, how do U.S. firms find their talent in the
Well, I
in
think
EU?
that I mean, that's obviously a very broad question. I mean, if you're a U.S. company looking for fine talent in Europe, look, the same way that you would do it in the States. Obviously, there's certain platforms where you could advertise for that. Obviously, LinkedIn is a fantastic platform for that. There all of the recruiting firms. If you get more into senior levels, executive search firms are present across Europe, the same that you have in the U.S. Korn Ferry and Heidrick and Struggles and Spencer Stewart and all those guys. So that's a good way to do it. But look, at the end of the day, I think when you're looking to start in those markets, it's also a good idea to use your own personal network to get connected with people who could be a good fit. And I can guarantee you that the type of people you need to start a business are very different from the type of people that are going to run the business, right? That's very different skill sets. So you'll be looking for people who are capable of creating something from nothing, don't need that structure. And then when it grows to a level that it needs to be managed, that's when you can bring in some more experience, maybe even senior people to help build the business. But that is a different set of skills.
Yeah. Sounds good. Let's go ahead and jump into section 3 because we're just about perfectly on time. So we'll try,
All right.
try to keep it that way.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll go ahead again and share my screen.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I do want to get into part 3, but before I do want to offer this as an opportunity for those of you who might be interested in getting a copy of my presentation. If you just send an email to zoltan.vardy@me.com, just write Cornell in the subject line, and I'll go ahead and send you a link to a PDF version of the presentation. I'll also sign you up to my email list. I produce a lot of content on international sales and business development, articles, videos, podcasts, the like. You might find that interesting. So please, if you would like a copy of my presentation, go follow up and just send me an email with that. Okay, so part 3 is really about how to build, execute, and your plan. I see a lot of startups, build their strategy on the what I call the I know a guy method, right? Like, I know a guy I went to school with who's got a friend in this city who knows somebody that would be interesting. I'm going to reach out to him. I'm sure he'll be able to help. Or, my uncle used to work with some guy at Procter & Gamble in Germany, and I'm sure he's going to be the right person to speak to, right? So, obviously that's a potential opportunity, but I know a guy is just not scalable, right? I mean, your first clients, your first partners are most likely not your ideal customers. This approach may get you a few clients or partners, but it's unlikely you'll get many more. And, finally, the obstacles you have to overcome to convince people you already know are very different than ones you have to convince that who've never heard of you before, right? So the worst thing you can do is to apply this already shaky, unscalable strategy to entering the European market. I believe in following a much more strategic approach, a structured approach built around 3 things. In the same way that if you, perhaps not a great analogy, but if you're invading a country, you'd invade by land and air and sea. You do the same by building a landing strategy that encompasses outbound sales, partnerships, and inbound marketing. And so I would say that with this 3-pronged strategy, you should be able to close a couple of deals to start, give you some European case studies, generate some cash, and test your Europe-based deal delivery capabilities. So I just want to speak about these very briefly. In terms of come to outbound sales, obviously, when you're taking the initiative to get in touch with potential customers, I would encourage you to manage the process yourself. So this is not something you would delegate. You as a founder would want to get involved because you want to be on the front lines, gaining firsthand insights, integrating feedback that you get into your value proposition. I would encourage you to identify your top 10 hit list of customers, the customers who you believe to be your ideal customers, and then use traditional sales techniques to find a way in, that connection that gets you in to start a meaningful conversation. I think in this day and age, you can start these conversations virtually. There's nothing wrong with setting up a 30-minute introductory Zoom call, but be ready to meet in person. I think as we get through this post-COVID period and get into that post-COVID period, personal relationships, especially these initial ones, are critical. And again, build your network, right? I mean, each of these meetings is an opportunity to ask for a referral. I would encourage you to seek out the conferences and events and exhibitions in your niche are being held in Europe. Attend those. People are there to meet others, to do business. It's an awesome opportunity to get a lay of the land personally and to start building these relationships. Literally, if you're in the startup technology space, there's at least one major event in some major city in Europe every month. So, at least, if not 2 or 3. So there's an interesting case study I just want to share with you. It's with a company called Radius Networks. And it's a good example of how you can accelerate your expansion by tapping into your existing US customer base to build your presence. And I use this example. It comes from a good friend of mine who also a classmate of mine from Cornell. His name is Mark Wallace. He's the founder of Radius Networks. They operate a platform called Flyby, which basically optimizes customer pickup in restaurants, in grocery stores, in retail outlets using location-based technology. And see, what Mark did was he built a successful relationship with McDonald's in the US, all 16,000 locations where they integrated this technology. They became preferred partners, and they've used this relationship to expand into 45 different countries, over 20,000 locations, by introducing this customer pickup technology to McDonald's worldwide. And when I spoke to Mark, he's told me that Europe was by far the easiest set of markets to navigate. He focused on the UK, on France, and Germany. And what's interesting is that while they do have a few people on site in the UK and Hungary, they assist their European operations mostly through a network of contractors. These contractors are developers in various locations to support customer onboarding. There's a logistics warehouse contracting relationship they have in Budapest that stores all the equipment for distribution in Europe. They have local sales contractors in place that participate in kind of the sales process alongside the global sales team based in the US. And at this point, actually 25% of the company's total revenues are from Europe, which is actually 80% of their total international revenues. So, this is a model that I would actually encourage many of you to consider. And it's something that they are now following through on to build similar relationships with other fast food restaurants, Five Guys, Burger King, and Domino's Pizza. And that's kind of the basis for their international expansion. So that's outbound sales. Let's talk about partnerships. As you continue your kind of outbound sales activities, you're going to come across businesses that operate in a similar segment, who could serve as a foundation for creating sort of what I would call reseller partnerships. And these partnerships help you build credibility because you tap into their existing relationships and they extend your sales reach as well. They call them very different things. I've kind of identified 3 types of partners that are worth looking at. So distributors are companies that resell your product or service to the end customer. Oftentimes they're selling complementary products or services to whatever it is you're selling. There are connectors. These are companies that aggregate a group of potential customers. So trade associations are typical. So let's say you're in the automobile industry, and I'm sure the German Automobile Trade Association exists. I'm not sure, but I'm sure it does. And you can tap into relations with them to see how you can get to their members. Or there are marketing agencies. Traditionally in the advertising agency business, these agencies represent a lot of different customers that you can do business with in a bulk basis. And of course, there are agents, right? These are the folks that represent you to target customers. They sit on your side of the negotiating table. They sell on your behalf. All of these are amazing ways to kind of tap into existing relationships and to build your presence. And finally, there's inbound marketing. And inbound marketing is really about, getting people to find you. And, there's only so much effort and time you can put into, doing the initial contact. You have to let European customers discover you. And the way you do that is, first of all, you create a relevant digital relevant digital footprint. If you look at your website, if somebody from Europe were to see that, are they going to know that you are somebody who's interested in doing business in Europe? If they look at your social media profiles, whether it's on the LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, are you sending the message that you are available, let's say, there, or you're interested in building relationships with companies there? They should be ways to reach out to you. And I think one of the great ways to do that also is to build your visibility through public relations efforts, getting into certain magazines, newspapers, blogs, podcasts, whatever it is that gets your name out there, being present at events, not just as an attendee, but as a speaker, as a panel member, as an on-site exhibitor. This is all great stuff that leads to building visibility for your business. So those are kind of the three different things I think you can focus on. And I want to wrap up by giving you sort of my top 5 tips to keep in mind as you plan your own European expansion strategy. And it's based on the principle that I once read from Thomas Edison, who apparently was a smart guy. He said, vision without execution is hallucination. I love that because I think it is all about execution. So I do want to share with you a couple of things that I would encourage you to keep in mind. The first thing I would do is define what success looks like, right? You have to decide what is your goal of your European expansion. Are you doing this to become a US company with a dominant European presence? Do you just want to develop a few European customers to build your global credentials? Are you happy with creating a network of European partners who do your bidding for you? Whatever it is, you have to decide what your objective is, because that's going to impact your devotion of resources, whether it's time and money, and even your hiring decisions. The second is to track your progress. Whichever path you choose, you have to have a plan, you have to have some goals, some KPIs, record your progress, integrate the feedback you're getting, draw your conclusions, and adjust if you need to, right? I mean, it's very unlikely that you'll come up with a perfect strategy to start. You will be adjusting your value proposition, your product offering, your partnership strategy. It's a natural part of building a business. Third is expand in manageable stages, right? So you can do this by doing like the whole, full commitment, or doing it very soft. I would encourage you to expand in a couple of steps. So level 1 is what I would call remote sales, right? This is where you're traveling there. You're getting those initial conversations going, you're getting a lay of the land, you're getting some initial conversations with customers. Then you're moving on to maybe hiring some local partners who will sell on your behalf, who will represent you. In this case, you want to make sure you're supporting them with marketing the resources, helping them in delivery of the services that you're selling. Level 3 is when you're actually building a team. You can only build a local business from a distance for only so long. So you need to hire some senior people in sales and marketing and customer success and product development. I think one of the decisions you'll need to make is, do you want to kind of hire a general manager type of person that's going to oversee your operations there, or much more of a senior sales leader who taps into your existing resources in the US? There's always an option to consider, which is having a founder on the ground. Obviously, it's a big commitment. But that founder could be really leading the charge, and it's a clear indication of the market that this is important for you. They could be part of a broader landing team. These are all decisions to make. The fourth tip I would say is use accelerators for soft landing. This is something we discussed earlier. There are a lot of accelerators in Europe you can use to tap into their resources and their network. And finally, this might seem a bit quirky or unrealistic, but try and become a European. And what I mean by that is, there's a certain level of distance you can have, but look for opportunities to seem more European. Register a subsidiary in Europe, get a European office address, a European mobile phone number, start working with European professional service providers, make sure your sales and marketing materials are in the languages of your target markets, hire local language speakers in customer facing roles. These are all steps that you can take to seem more relevant to the local market. So with that, I'm happy, of course, to take more questions, but just to kind of wrap up, I talked about, the importance of getting a lay of the land, of understanding it's a highly diverse market. It's full of business and cultural trapdoors that you have to understand and avoid. I talked about how you have to focus your market entry, do your market research, fill the gaps, explore different physical locations that suit your business, and prepare yourself in mind and body for what I'm sure is going to be an intense experience. And then finally, don't do an ad hoc approach. Build a structured and systematic model around outbound sales, partnerships, and inbound marketing, and maximize your chance of success. So with that, I'm happy to take any more questions for the time that we have available.
Excellent. This has been fantastic. I don't see any more questions coming in. We'll give it another minute, maybe, but
okay. I do have one final sign-off slide. So if there are no questions, everything.
Absolutely.
Okay. Zach, any questions from you?
No, I can give up my quick closing remarks, and we'll be ending right on time, which is good because people have some busy schedules. So why
Okay.
don't we just jump in? So from my perspective, this has actually been fantastic. I really enjoyed it. So thanks so much for first of all for making the time to meet me during reunion. That was actually that was actually really appreciated. I know
Absolutely.
we've been trying to get together for a while, and I hope everyone on the webinar enjoyed it as well. Reminder: it is being recorded today and will be available after on the CEN live stream channel and also the E@C YouTube channel. And I would like to remind everyone that if you happen to be stateside on October 21st, we're having our annual big entrepreneurship conference that we hold in New York City each year. It's called Eclectic Convergence. We have a great speaker lineup. We'll put the link in the chat for that. And if you'd like to come down to Cornell Tech and check it out, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone.
And
Have a
and
wonderful
Yeah, and I'm sorry,
night.
just if I could just share that final slide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Apologies.
Go right ahead.
I did want to say if anybody is inspired by today's discussion, again, here's a reminder: if you want a copy of my presentation, please send that email to Zoltan Vardy, zoltan.vardy@me.com. And if you have any interest in talking about expansion into Europe, here are my contact details, my website, my LinkedIn profile. Please do reach out. I'd be more than happy to have no strings attached conversation to see what your plans are and if there's any way that I can help you.
That's
So,
very, very nice. You'll probably get deluged, but that's okay.
okay, that's fine. Well, that's the price of doing business. So thank
Yeah,
you very much, everybody. I really hope you found this to be useful.
yeah. Thanks, everyone. So we're going to sign off, and when we do, we're just going to completely go away. It's a quick goodbye. So thanks again for participating, and we'll see you soon. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.